I'm Craig Fisher, and this is Inside Talent, where we take you into the minds behind the scenes and show you some of the coolest tools and best practices of some of the coolest people in the talent industry. Hey, it's Craig Fisher. Today I'm talking with Lars Schmidt, who has been putting together a database of resources for employers and from employers, some of their corporate communications about the current crisis and how they're dealing with it, listings of companies who are hiring, and several other things in a document where I will post the link for here. You can actually find out information about it if you go on places like Twitter and search for hashtag coronavirushr. Hey, it's Craig Fisher. I am here with my friend Lars Schmidt. Lars, how are you?
Greg, I'm doing all right, buddy. How are you?
I'm coping. I'm getting through.
Yeah, I think coping and all right is kind of that's the best we can hope for right now.
Yeah, and it's a weird time, and as people who work from home on a regular basis, this doesn't change a lot for us, except that we're not traveling.
Yeah.
The conferences we're supposed to be speaking at are getting either canceled or pushed back or changed to virtual events, and so that's fine for you and me because we have home office video studios set up and always ready to go.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, this is just completely new. They're not around their coworkers. Everything is happening in virtual meetings, and it's just a little strange, I think.
I mean, it's a big adjustment. I mean, let's be honest with this. It's like you've got tons of people who had never or rarely worked from home, and at a massive global scale, you're forced into that position. And obviously, we're talking about a subset of the working population. There's tons of people that don't have the luxury of working from home. That's a
Right.
very different situation. But for the folks that do, yeah, it's not, it is an adjustment. You have to shift. And so kind of seeing how companies are trying to do that seemingly overnight is interesting. And thank God there's tons of resources out there to help them adjust and talk about tools. And you've been creating content around, how to get better video from home and things like that. I think that's really helpful, but we're in this like weird in between period as we transition to whatever this new normal is and for however long it's going to last and try to develop our new, operating rhythms and cadences.
Right. Allegis has been putting resources together for our providers on the MSP side, who are staffing vendors to our big customers, as well as our teams who do the outsourced RPO work for Fortune 500 companies all over the world, and giving the employers best practices as to how we're going to manage through this, how we're going to do offers remotely and interviews and everything else. And it's staggering the volume of information that needs to be out there right now.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and so you have started putting together a very interesting document and library of resources for that kind of information. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that? And I find this to be very helpful for me personally, and I'm trying to add to it when I can as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it started probably 3 weeks ago. I guess we should timestamp this. It's March 20th right now. So about 3 weeks ago, I wrote an article for Fast Company around how HR leaders are preparing their businesses for coronavirus. And so my aim with that was this was soon after Coinbase open sourced their coronavirus response plan document, which kind of became the first, coronavirus specific response plan that a lot of other companies modeled off of. And so I took that and I curated a bunch of other resources around, GitLab's work from home resources, things like that, because I knew that people were going to need that kind of support. And, within about 2 days, the situation was changing so fast. I realized quickly that a static document was just not going to work for the scale and the complexity and the velocity of this situation. And so I created a Google Doc and made it open source where I kind of pulled a lot of those resources that I initially curated for the Fast Company article, but then tapped into my network and kind of pushed hard and said, hey, look, if you're using anything that's helpful, add it to this list. If you're open to sharing your own coronavirus response plans, add that to this list. And within the matter of days, it became a pretty massive list that was originally kind of in phase one of the pandemic, focused on coronavirus response plans, conference cancellations and suspensions, and companies that were limiting travel and encouraging remote work. Um, Now it's kind of evolved. Now that we're in what I would consider to be phase two of the pandemic, the conversation around like who's suspending travel is kind of moot at this point. That's happening at a global scale, and so now it's kind of evolved. I still link to those resources and keep them current, but it's now more focused on resources to support HR and business leaders navigate this new normal. So from remote work to legal ramifications to resources to help parents who've got their kids at home now and are juggling school and work and everything else to companies that are having layoffs, to alternatives to layoffs, to help people realize they're that's not your only option. There's other things you can do to trim costs. To just yesterday, I mean, it's evolving still on a day-to-day basis. Where just yesterday, Susan Lamott reached out and said, "Hey, it would be great if there was a section on there with companies that are hiring." And within a day, now there's probably 30 companies listed on there that are actively hiring. And I imagine that piece will kind of get beefed out even more as a lot of companies pause and contract their hiring, but others, based on the circumstances, are expanding that. We want to try to make this a resource as well for people that are impacted by reductions and rifts and layoffs to help them find companies that are still hiring.
Yeah. Well, and so speaking of that, the companies that are hiring, so I think we talked about this. Allegis does work with CVS,
Yeah.
and they are one of the companies that are hiring because they've got physical locations in so many parts of the world, and because they have this pharmacy distribution system where you can mail order your stuff, right? They've got lots of needs in warehousing and call centers, and getting the word out to the right audiences of people who are getting laid off is an interesting trick, right? I mean, there are EEOC guidelines around ads you can target to certain types of workers, right? And so I think a broader message about where the resources are and where, I think this is a great resource for job seekers as well as employers and recruiters. Alan Fleur started the Facebook group around companies that are laying off so that we know as recruiters, who we can go find for some of these jobs. And now you've got the companies that are hiring still included in this document. We need to marry the two somehow a little bit and get, I don't know, some sort of searchable database, I feel like.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're seeing right now is like, as this is unfolding so quickly, a lot of the resources are kind of hacked together, right? Like this
Right.
Google Doc certainly hacked together. I think there's tons of Google Docs that are popping up that are great for collaborative editing, but they're not elegant,
Right.
right? They're hacked. And so I think that will be the next phase of this. Like as things settle is not the right word because things aren't going to settle for a while. But
Right.
as we collectively make this shift from our past normal to our new normal and settle into that, I think you'll start to see technology and other platforms that can aggregate those sources and make it more UX friendly, make it more searchable, right? So it's not just a static document with links, something you can search by geography, skill set. I mean, a typical job board functionality,
Right.
and a database for talent. I could see, and that would be, if you're a vendor listening to this in that space, hint, hint, that might be a great way that you can give back to the community, is kind of creating that platform, whether it would be like a LinkedIn or an Indeed or whoever. You've got the technology, you've got the infrastructure. So, creating something that lives outside of your, kind of core ecosystem, where people can upload their profiles and upload jobs at no cost. I think that would be a great service for the community, because it's going to be a volatile couple of months at best, probably year. So
Right.
wherever I think we can come together as a community to try to help streamline some of those things and, help job seekers, help, humans that are impacted by this. I think that's a real service we can provide.
This sounds to me like an interesting project for my quantum work team, and you've just given me a great idea.
There you go.
So, one of the things that I'm finding interesting is you've got some lists of alternatives to layoffs for employers, right? And I was on. So, one of the great things that we're getting to do now, as recruiters and consultants and vendors in our space, is get together on a regular basis on these kind of group calls, which we've kind of done here and there, but not nearly as often as we're doing now. But we're sharing, ideas and resources and just keeping each other sane, right, from being locked up in the house, which is fun. But Dean DaCosta wrote something recently and was saying yesterday when he hears from employers that want to lay off recruiters because they're not hiring right now. He says, well, look, how long does it take to lay somebody off, right? You can do that overnight, but then how long does it take to ramp somebody back up if you want to hire them? It's 2 months to find and hire them. Then it's 3 months before they're productive. The math doesn't really work if you're only going to be, laying people off for 2 to 6 months. And so you're spending an average of $250,000 more in man hours, training, ramp up time, and loss of productivity per person that you lay off, which I think is a fun math.
Yeah, I mean, I think companies are, just like, people, right? People are uncertain. They're anxious. They don't know the ultimate impact this is going to have over time. And I think for companies, this just hit them. A lot of them weren't really paying attention. And so now, boom, it's here. It's changed seemingly for them overnight. And so, the service industry right now is getting hammered, as people are staying home. And so, other industries I think are not necessarily as immediately impact, but there's trickle down impacts from just that whole sector essentially being kind of shut down overnight. So, I think a lot of companies are thinking about cost cutting measures. I think consultants and contractors tends to come first in that. I think that the aim of having that section for alternatives is to say, like, your default may be cutting headcount, but there's other things that you can do, and frankly you should do before you get to that point. And even if you get to that point where you've done all those other things and you still need to tighten and control costs more, there are alternatives to just flat cutting people.
Right.
And so I want to include some of those links just because, again, I think as an HR community, we're all experiencing this for the first time. Like, there's lots of HR leaders that have been through different levels of adversity, but nothing quite like this. And so wherever we can, to me, this is where open source shines, because it allows people to see what their peers are doing, how they're approaching things, and use that to help inform their own strategy. And I think in particular when it comes to companies that are getting to that point, having an idea of how other companies might be approaching that more creatively without just traditionally saying, okay, we're going to cut 10% of the workforce. Having an idea of what those plans look like, I think can be helpful and ultimately, hopefully, save some jobs.
I think you're right. No one was prepared for this, clearly, right? I mean, it's just not possible. I think lots of positive things are going to end up coming out of this somehow, right? I mean, advances in communication and technology and preparedness plans, and there has to be a silver lining somewhere. But I think we're looking at a 2-year long tail at the economic impact at the very least. But I heard recently you mentioned hospitality sector. State governments right now are in this country responsible for response plans, right? We're not getting a lot of top-down leadership from the national government on this. They're leaving it up to the states, which somehow makes sense and somehow doesn't. But regardless, they are out of space for the response that they have to give to their constituents in those states, right? So they've now got to release immediate funds for those who are out of work because that money's now immediately available. They've got to answer tax questions and health questions and testing questions and all these things. And they don't have the space to put people far enough apart in call centers to keep them safe. And they don't have the remote work capabilities to set that up as well. So I'm hearing that hotel chains that are now not booking customers are offering up their large warehouses that are, basically big call centers to state governments for this. So interesting alternatives are happening and ways to, churn some of this money that's being dumped into the economy are springing up, which is fun.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that this is, in this set of circumstances and adversity, ingenuity is we're gonna see some really interesting examples of that. I think looking at hotels which are very underbooked near hospitals, like I see there'll be a partnership there, especially as the cases mount and the hospitals become overwhelmed, if they can take, non-coronavirus patients and put them somewhere else, so they're not in that kind of ICU level need. They can focus on more of the high level trauma patients at the hospitals. That will be relief. Obviously, video technology and virtual technology is going to be massive because it's going to be essential through this year. And so I think that we'll see that and other platforms that hopefully can help bring people together. Especially this, I don't want to underestimate the impact of physical distancing, right? Like you can, if you're doing what you can to really stay home, like that connection to your fellow humans and your family and all these people that you're used to seeing all the time, and now you can't outside of this, right, through a camera. That's going to be really difficult, I think, for people to kind of process, especially over time. So finding new ways to connect with each other and doing it through a platform that is usually a every now and then thing, and now it's an all the time thing. I think that's going to be a big adjustment, but I think there'll be some interesting technologies coming from that.
Well, with that said, Lars, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, buddy. It's always good to see you, Craig.
Thanks for this update. I appreciate it, and keep up the good work, fight the good fight, and we'll continue adding to this document and marrying technology to help employers and job seekers out.
There you go, buddy. Well, thanks for having me on and spreading the word in the doc, and take care of yourself and be well.
Cheers.
All right, buddy.
Thank you for listening to Inside Talent. Learn more about the future of talent today at insidetalent.org, where you can sign up for regular updates, and you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app.